Positioning and layout. The display property. 3 questions. Display block. Every element on a web page is rectangular box. The display property determines how the rectangle box behaves. A block element is an element that takes up the fullest width available, with the line breaks before and after. The style rules in the following example displays the inline span. Examples of the block's elements. Elements as block levels. Block levels elements. Span. First paragraph span. Second paragraph span. Third paragraph span. Fourth paragraph span. Display block. What value of the display property makes the inline element act as a blocking level element? Display inline. A inline element only takes up as much width as necessary and does not force line breaks. The CSS. The codable will produce the following result. Setting the display property of an element only changes how the element is displayed, not what kind of element it is. So, an inline element with display block is not allowed to have other blocks element inside it. What value of the display property makes the block level element act as an inline element? Display none. Display none hides an element so it does not take up any space. The element will be hidden and the page will be displayed as if the element is not there. The HTML. H1. This text will not display as we set the value to none. Headline of this paragraph is not displayed as we set the value to none. The CSS. H1. Display none. Result. There are plenty of other display values such as list item, table, table cells, table column, grid, etc. Just play with values to see differences. The difference. Make the element with the ID MyStyle disappear. The visuality property. Visibility property. The visibility property. The visibility property specifies whether an element is visible or hidden. The most common values are visible and hidden. Hiding an element can be done setting the display property to none, or the visibility property to hidden. However, Notice that these two methods produces different results. Visibility hidden is an element, but it will still take up the same space as before. The element will be hidden, but it will still affect the layout. Here's an example. This is a heading, div hidden, div class equals hidden. This text will not display in the browser. The space above the paragraph is empty because the visibility of div element is set to hidden. Div hidden, visibility hidden. This is the heading. Result, display none. Hidden an element without holding a place for that element. Changing visibility hidden to display hidden will produce the following result. The values of the visibility property are hidden, visible. Positioning, 3 questions. Positioning elements. The CSS positioning properties allow you to position an element. You can also place an element behind another and specify what should happen when an element content is too big. Elements can be positioned using the top, bottom, left, and right properties. However, these properties will not work unless positioned properly in set first. They also work differently depending on the positioning method. Static positioning. HTML elements are positioned static by default. A static positioned element is always positioned according to the normal flow of the page. Paragraph or not with no positioning. Paragraph with no position. Paragraph with position. This paragraph has a static position. Class position static. Position static. Position static. Top. Right. Color red. Static position elements are not affected by the top, bottom, left, or right properties. Why is a static value used in positioning? To make the element run in the natural order of the page. Fixed positioning. An element with a fixed position is positioned relative to the browser window and will not move even if the window is scrolled. Position can be specified using one or more of the position properties, top, right, bottom, and left. In the example below, the paragraph is fixed to 30 pixels from the top and 5 pixels from the right. Fixed position elements are removed from the normal flow. The document and other elements behave like the fixed position elements does not exist. Fixed position elements can overlap other elements. Drag and drop from the options below to fix the paragraph to 100 pixels from the top and 50 pixels from the left. Relative positioning. A relative positioning element is positioned relative to its normal positioning. The properties top, right, bottom, and left can be used to specify how the render box will be shifted. The CSS with border will be black solid. Fix it. Spam. Key color white. Position relative top left. The content of relative positioned elements can be moved and overlap other elements, but reserve space for the elements it still prevents in the normal flow. The value cannot be used for table cells, columns, column groups, rows, row groups, or captions. Absolute positioning. An absolute position element is positioned relative to the first parent element that has a position other than static. If no such element is found, the containing block is HTML. Absolutely positioned elements are removed from the normal flow. The document and other elements behave like absolutely positioned elements do not exist. Absolutely positioned elements can overlap other elements. What is the purpose of the relative position? The relative value. It puts elements relative to the containing blocks. Puts elements relative to the normal flow. Floating. 2 questions. Floating. With CSS, float. An element can be pushed to the left or right, allowing other elements to wrap around it. Float is often used with images, but it is also useful when working with layouts. The values for the float property are left, right, and none. Left and right float elements in these directions. Respectively, none, the default ensures that the elements will not float. Below is an example of an image that is floated to the right. HTML. P image. Scroll logo. This paragraph is an image that is floated to the right. It is highly recommended to add a margin to the image so that the text does not get too close to the image. If you want your text to be easier to read, you should always add a few pixels between words and borders, images, and other content. Image, float, right. Elements are floated horizontally, meaning that an element can only be floated left or right, not up and down. In which direction can the elements be floating? Right, left. Element next to each other. If you place several floating elements, one after the other, they will float next to each other. If there is enough room. As an example, in a print layout image, images might be set into the page such as that text wraps around them as needed. Warp property along with flow is used in the example to make the element flow side by side. The clear property. Clearing the float. Elements that come after the floating elements will flow around it. To avoid this, use the clear property. The clear property specifies the size of an element where other floating elements are not allowed to be. In the example below, if we set the flow property to div, only the paragraph that comes after the div will be wrapped around the image, the HTML. This paragraph is above the div element and is not affected by the floating right property. This paragraph comes after the div element and is affected by the flow right property. These paragraphs also comes after the div element and is affected by the flow right property. Flow right, floating. If there is an element with the flow property, which neighbor's elements will be affected? The ones coming after. Using clear. Use the value right, left, and both to specify the side of an element where other floating elements are not to be allowed. Are not allowed to be. The default value is none, which allows floating elements on both sides. The clear property accepts the values none, left, right, and clearing floats. Both is used to clear floats both is used to clear flows coming from either directions. The HTML. This paragraph is above the div element and is not affected by the flow right property. Clearing. The clear property is used to take the next element of the floating group, the overflow property. The overflow property. As discussed earlier, every element on the page is a box. If the height of the box is not set, the height of the box will grow as large as necessary to accommodate the content. The HTML div. This text is inside the div element, which has a blue background color and is floated to the left. We set a specific height and width for the div element, and as you can see, the content cannot fit. Div width, height, background color, light blue, float left. Result. The CSS overflow property specifies the behavior that occurs when an element's contents overflows the element box. The overflow property is used to make the box fit the data it contains. The overflow property values. There are 4 values for the overflow property visible. Property. Visible, the default value. Scroll, hidden, and auto. The value of scroll results in clip overflow, but a scroll bar is added so the rest of the content might be seen. CSS, flow, and scroll. The code above will produce both horizontal and vertical scroll. Fill in the blanks to produce a horizontal and vertical scroll bar. Auto and hidden. Auto. If overflow is clipped, a scroll bar should be added to make it possible to see the rest of the content. Hidden. The overflow is clipped and the rest of the content will be invisible. Hidden. The default value for the overflow property is visible. Yeah, I already said that. What is the default value of the overall value of the overflow property? The X index property. When elements are positioned outside the normal flow, they can overlap other elements. The C-index property specifies the stack order of an element. Which element should be placed in front of or behind the others? Blue. Background color. Migration button. Width. Height. Color. Red. Background color. Position relative. When elements are positioned outside the normal flow, they can overlap other elements. The C-index property specifies the stack order of an element. Which element should be placed in front of behind the other element? The red box overlaps the blue box because it was placed later in the HTML markup. The C-index property can change this order. Okay. By default, which element is markup? Which element in the markup will overlap the other when elements begin stacking? The last element. Assigning the C-index property. Assigning a higher C-index value to the blue div and a lower C-index value to the red div will result in the following. The C-index result. The C-index works only on positioned elements. Position absolute, position relative, or position fixed. In order to make the C-index property work, you must position elements. Model for quiz. If you give a negative value to a top property, in which direction will the box move? Will move up. When the float property is used with the values of left or right, anything else that lists in the containing element will float around the element associated with the float property. When the text needs more space than the dimension of the box, the browser shows scroll for the overflow property with the value of scroll, and when the text needs more space than the dimensions of the box, the browser shows scrolls for the overflow property with the values of scroll and Auto. Assign width of 500 pixels to the text element and enable fixed scroll bars. Overflow. Fixed scroll bars. One more. Fill in the blanks and make the blue box disappear from the web page. Absolute display visibility. Display and visibility.